For decades in American archaeology, archaeologists thought that the first Americans entered the Americas from Beringia, a now submerged landmass between Northeast Asia and Alaska, through an ice-free corridor some 13,500 years ago. These ancestral Native Americans then developed the well-documented Clovis tradition, which then quickly spread across the North American continent. Genetic evidence and archaeological evidence beginning the latter part of the 20th century showed that people were coming into the Americas some 14,000 to 15,000 years ago. Those earlier peoples were dubbed Pre-Clovis by archaeologists. One of the first of these pre-Clovis sites to be discovered, Monte Verde, isn't even in North America, but in Chile. Radiocarbon dates from the Monte Verde site place it at around 14,200 years ago. This means that the ancestral Native Americans who settled here would have arrived well before that date to make the journey from Beringia all the way to Chile. A small number of pre-Clovis sites have been discovered to date, including Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, the Page Ladson site in Florida, Paisley Caves in Oregon, the Schaefer and Habor site in Wisconsin, the Manus site in Washington, and others. Recently, a new pre-Clovis site has come to light in archaeology, the Debra L. Friedkin site in Texas. Here, some artifacts were recovered in a pre-Clovis context, below a Clovis assemblage. In this video, I flintknap a replica of one of the pre-Clovis projectile points found at this site. Currently, mainstream archaeology accepts that the most probable hypothesis for how the Americas were settled was via a coastal route from Northeast Asia some 18,000 to 15,000 years ago. The ancestors of Native Americans didn't need to cross vast stretches of the Pacific to arrive in North America. The formation of Ice Age glaciers trapped massive amounts of the Earth's water in giant ice sheets, causing a dramatic drop in the sea level. This exposed a continent-wide landmass between Northeast Asia and what is now Alaska. Scientists call this landmass Beringia. Beringia would have been free of ice sheets and slightly warmer and more hospitable than Northeast Asia, making it an attractive place for people to settle. From here, the most likely way people got into the Americas was via the coast. The Pacific coastline was free of the ice still covering much of North America, and had a more stable environment than the interior. While people could have walked along this coast, it seems that they may have had watercraft as well. Due to Paleo-Indian artifacts, dated to 13,000 to 11,500 calibrated years before present, being found on islands off the Pacific coast, which included shell middens and human remains as well, is a well-supported claim that these people had seaworthy boats for transportation. Previously, archaeologists thought that people had crossed into North America via an ice-free corridor between the two massive ice sheets covering North America. However, geological evidence suggests that this corridor wouldn't have been passable until 13,000 years ago, well after people had already been documented arriving in the continent. Coastlines tend to have a more stable, temperate climate than interior regions, which would have been attractive for people migrating here. Freshwater sources tend to be concentrated and easily accessible in coastal zones, which would have been important for the ancestral Native American peoples moving into this landscape for the first time. Coastlines also provide diverse opportunities for hunting, fishing, and foraging from both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. Kelp forests growing along much of the Pacific coast would have provided rich habitats for Paleo-Indian peoples to exploit. The sad reality of this coastal route model is that many of the potential sites left by pre-Clovis people would now be inundated by seawater. As the glaciers melted at the end of the Pleistocene era, sea levels rose well past the point that they were when people would have entered the Americas. This means that many sites left by people migrating down the Pacific coasts are now buried in relatively deep waters, kilometers off the current coast. Genetic evidence also supports this coastal migration model for the settlement of the Americas. Using mitochondrial population genomics, bioanthropologists looked at Native American genetics to understand how the Americas were populated and from where. These researchers demonstrated that Native American genes are most similar to groups in Northeast Asia, although this has been known for some time. More specifically, these researchers showed that a single founding population moved into Beringia some 23,000 to 19,000 years ago, becoming distinct from other Northeast Asian populations. A strong population expansion started at 18,000 years ago, finishing at 15,000 years ago, suggesting people moved out of Beringia into the New World. This fits the archaeological models of a pre-Clovis settlement of the Americas along a Pacific coastal route. The Debra L. Friedkin site is a multi-component site in Texas that has cultural horizons from the late prehistoric period all the way back to Clovis and Pre-Clovis. The Pre-Clovis horizon at the site has been termed the Buttermilk Creek Complex. About 100,000 Buttermilk Creek Complex artifacts were recovered, including 328 tools and 12 complete and fragmentary projectile points. The Pre-Clovis horizon lacked any suitable carbon samples for dating, so a technique known as OSL dating, which is short for optically stimulated luminescence, was used to date the soil deposition around the artifacts. This dating method produced dates of 13,500 years ago to 15,500 years ago. Two styles of projectile points were found here, including triangular lanceolate and stemmed lanceolate points. I'm napping the latter style, of which only one complete specimen was recovered. All the specimens of this stemmed type have use-wear traces, which indicate that it functioned as a projectile point rather than as a knife blade. Other Buttermilk Creek complex lithic artifacts include bifaces, blade segments, cores, snap fracture tools, retouched flakes, and expedient tools. The material I'm flintknapping this point from is pedernales chert, which occurs in Texas. I chose this material as it seemed a plausible material for the pre-Clovis people at the Friedkin site to use. Edwards Plateau chert seems to have been the material used by the people at the Friedkin site for most, if not all, of their tools, and is macroscopically similar to pedernales chert. The Friedkin site occurs in the immediate vicinity of Edwards Plateau chert outcrops. I'm also using the pressure flaker tool I made a few videos ago. So far, I'm very pleased with how it performs. It works much better than the antler tines that I've been using. I had to replace the leather strap with one that's a bit longer and wider, but other than that, I haven't needed to make any major adjustments. As with other pre-Clovis sites, the Friedkin site is held under a great deal of scrutiny by the archaeological community. Some archaeologists doubt that the pre-Clovis horizon at the site is actually pre-Clovis, or pre-Clovis in the way that the investigators of the Friedkin site claim. The artifact assemblage is similar to Clovis in many ways, and some argue that these artifacts may have been pushed down via bioturbation. Bioturbation are natural processes that can move artifacts from their original vertical position in the soil column. Roots, animal and insect burrows, crayfish burrows, and the like are all kinds of bioturbation that can displace artifacts. Sometimes archaeologists can recognize bioturbation if soil from a higher soil stratum intrudes into a lower stratum. Trampling, caused by animals or humans walking across artifacts, can also push artifacts down into lower stratums. Critics of the pre-Clovis component at Friedkin cite these processes as a way early Clovis artifacts could have been pushed down into older soils, and so appear as pre-Clovis. However, these are possible explanations for doubt of the pre-Clovis nature of the site, rather than direct observations that prove that there was no pre-Clovis here. These same critics also contend that the Buttermilk Creek complex may be very early Clovis, or a sort of proto-Clovis assemblage. Further investigation at the Debra L. Friedkin site and analysis of the recovered data is needed to either disprove the claims of pre-Clovis or strengthen the argument for its pre-Clovis status.